Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 25 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today, as always, by fellow SuperCloud t-shirt wearing colleague, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John? We've had a wardrobe malfunction, haven't we? We don't exchange notes each morning about which t-shirt we're going to wear, and maybe we should because
perhaps we need to. Perhaps we need to. It's just on the top of the drawer, I promise.
Well, as I was mentioning in our preamble, this is actually probably the best traveled of all of the Logicata SuperCloud t-shirts because it has been on a year-long journey around the world to South America, where it probably sat in a postal delivery office for best part of a year and made its way back to me. And it's still in pristine condition. So I thought I would don the best traveled Logicata SuperCloud t-shirt that we have. Everything has a story, and this one's story is quite interesting.
I'm just trying to think of that journey because it would have gone from the south of England to Heathrow and then might have gone via the States, might have gone direct. Not sure how Royal Mail do that. And then it would have sat kind of in country for a bit, and then it would have gone through customs, and then it would have sat in like a local distribution setup for a bit, and maybe gone out on a truck and then come back again and then sat there for a while and gradually made its way back through the whole system.
Yeah, and it came out as good as new. But I know it's been to at least a Spanish-speaking country because it has a sticker on it with some Spanish handwritten on it. So I assume it's been to Colombia, but definitely been to a Spanish-speaking country. Anyway, we digress. We are also joined today by a very special guest, Steve Woodard, second time round on Logicast as our guest. So obviously you enjoyed it first time. How are you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's always good to be back. Really enjoyed the first round. I'm ready for a second round.
Nice. Tell us what you've been doing since you were last on, if you can ignore John's cat in the background there.
I actually have been working on my AWS ambassador, so getting that for the second time. So I've been working on that. Should have that by next month or so. Still staying very heavily plugged in with AWS. I'm a customer technology advisor for Kyndryl. Kyndryl definitely is a spinoff from IBM. We spun off about 2 years ago. We power some of the largest customers on the planet. We're in over 60 countries, and we manage most of the world's most critical IT infrastructure. So that's my pitch for Kyndryl.
Nice.
But
and you mentioned you have a couple of podcasts of your own that you may wish to plug.
Yes, I do. Currently, I'm the host of the Tech Travels podcast, where I interview and discuss AI, blockchain, Web3 with tech entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, people who are in the finance world of how these startups get kind of funded, innovators, CEOs, technical evangelists, and of course, we just talk a lot around AI. We talk about the landscape, and I'm also starting up another one called Tech Bites with a little bit more humor with another coworker of mine, the former Amazonian. So we want to try to bring a little bit of some fit and flair to some news that's happening in tech every single week. But trying to put on a weekly show is always very challenging, very difficult. Time, production, customer, balancing customer obligations, and then self-study. It's just like, it can be a lot. So those are some things that I'm working on, things that I'm passionate about. So it's a love of mine.
There's a reason we do no production. There's a reason we don't do it.
Yeah. Our production, our post-production effort is minimal. It's more a case of sharing because we are cranking out weekly. I think, as I mentioned in the preamble, this will be our 79th episode now of Logicast. But there is you have to build a system around it to make sure that you can keep up the content, keep up the guests, keep cranking out the episodes. But we wish you the best of luck with that new podcast, Steve. Before we move on to the main subject matter of this week, I just wanted to share with the audience that John's cat is a regular in the background of the podcast. And I found this amazing cat bed hat this weekend, which I'm really tempted to buy for John so he can just wear it on his head during the podcast, because I think that could be a unique selling point for the podcast, that not only will John's cat appear in the background, it will actually appear on his head. You might have to zoom out a little bit, John, to make that work, but I'm sure you could accommodate it.
Have you ever had 4 kilos sat on your head? They're kind of heavy.
I'm sure you can manage it. Yeah, I'm sure you can manage it. You work out, you know.
Yeah, but I don't put dumbbells on my head.
Well,
If you're doing that, you're doing something wrong.
Always time to start. I haven't ordered the bed yet, so you've got time to limber up.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, we're not here to talk about t-shirt travels or cat bed hats. As regular listeners to the podcast will know, we are here to talk about AWS news. And once a week, I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John and I pick a subset of the articles from the newsletter that we'd like to discuss with our guests. So we do have such a selection, of course, this week, which everybody on the call has read and will be happy to share their insights. So the first article this week, more of a feature announcement, really. And the title of this feature announcement is AWS CloudShell now supports Amazon Virtual Private Cloud. This is like a fairly basic feature announcement. Why did you pick this one, John?
Because I thought it was weird that it hadn't already been done, but I suppose it kind of makes sense. So for the uninitiated, CloudShell is the AWS CLI shell environment that's baked into the console, and you just sort of click a button and you have a shell. Great, brilliant. It's pre-authed with the account that you're in, which is great. You get the same permissions of whatever user you're currently using, whatever role you're currently using, which is great. And it sits there and it works. And it's got some commonly installed things in there as well. So it's got JQ and curl and wget, the stuff that you'd kind of expect to see. Brilliant. Why do you care? Why does it matter? Well, it means you don't have to faff around dealing with local shell environments, because some people don't want to configure them. It's kind of awkward in some cases to do that. You might not even have credentials, depending on your user setup, to interact with the shell. I mean, if you're using an SSO login, your shell credentials will reset every 1 to 12 hours. And some people find that really annoying. And if you're using IAM users, 1, stop it. And 2, you might not actually have access key, secret key configured. So, you might not have a way of interacting with the shell other outside of this. So that's useful. Right. Why is it important that it now supports VPCs? Well, there are an awful lot of things you'd want to do inside AWS without the internet. And that's kind of the size of it. The point of it running inside the VPC is you can now control network traffic in and out of the shell environment. It was previously not possible to do that, in the same way that like a Lambda that sits outside the VPC just has, unrestricted internet access. It could just do whatever it wanted. You could just do whatever you wanted with that shell. So it was, in theory, an attack vector if someone had compromised some credentials that got them access to the console, but limited maybe just the shell, so you don't have bigger problems. You could then use the shell and pivot around and do things you weren't supposed to, because it had unrestricted internet access. Now you can restrict the internet access, so you've closed down an attack vector if that's relevant to your use case, and it works great, lovely. Common tools are still pre-installed, so you don't have to go out to the internet to go and install JQ or whatever. But yeah, it's good. I like things. VPCs are a bit old hat as far as I'm concerned, being a serverless community builder, because it's more for controlling access in and out of servers and server-based resources. So they're a bit old hat as far as I'm concerned. But for those of us that do need to use it, and unfortunately I am one of those, great if you can put extra restrictions in place for your network traffic for a administrative function. Go for it.
Cool. You like Steve?
Yeah, I kind of like echo John's point. It's kind of like I've loved CloudShell from its very early, kind of when it was released a couple years ago when I was with AWS. Always been a big CloudShell fanboy. I love the direct integration. And especially now, what I really like about this is that now you really do have the ability to interact on the same subnet without additional network configuration. I think that's a really cool thing. I think it makes things from a developer's perspective much more convenient, since you do get those pre-authenticated AWS console credentials. And it really already gives you the ability to have those developer tools set up already. So I think it's a cool thing to have. I think maybe some things that might kind of hinder where might some gotchas might be is kind of maybe some of the limited customizations. I know for some customers that they may have highly customized setup environments. Not really sure. I haven't played around with this one too much, but sometimes CloudShell's predefined environment may lack that flexibility for some of them. And then people who are just not familiar with CloudShell or have not seen it at all, I mean, they may have to kind of maybe get up to speed on it. The learning curve on some of the new features may take some time, but just with anything else, like it's a new tool that, eventually we have to learn. Um, One thing that came to mind when I saw this was really being able to kind of already do some debug and monitoring kind of already at the VPC level with CloudShell. So I think if I was kind of an ops person, having that ability to have that direct shell right there for specifically for that, I think would be really cool. And so I think it's a cool thing to have.
I mean,
Nice.
CloudShell as a whole, not it as a service, but CloudShell is one of those sorts of traditionalist tools that traditionalist ops people don't like, because it's not my terminal on my laptop. It's a terminal in the browser, and people
Mhm.
get a bit kind of ooh about it. But like, I don't get that personally. I don't get that.
Well,
Just
I mean,
it's there, use it.
the same argument can be said for when people said, "Hey, how about instead of using Putty, why don't you use Systems Manager, Session Manager?" Right? It was just kind of like, what? I can actually SSH right into the actual terminal itself directly from the browser session, and it was like, yes, it's called Session Manager. No way! It just kind of blew people away. It was just like, no Putty required.
I don't want to use that. I
Magic.
don't want to use that. I don't want to use that. It's rubbish. It's rubbish. It's in the browser. Ugh. Okay, and everyone else will just move on and get more work done.
That's the thing, right? It's look, I think of reducing setup time, less tools that you have to play around with. Less tools you have to have. If you could simply just go to just the browser and have everything integrated right there. For me personally, I think that's great since I don't have the ability on some tools to be able to even install them on my laptop. So it's easy for me to just get right into what I need to get into just directly right from the browser. So, I mean, as more and more laptops get secured, um, I just kind of having this is just a great feature to have because it's right there in the browser.
Yeah, that's a key thing, isn't it? Not everyone can just do a brew install and have whatever additional tool they need. Not everyone
Application
can.
denied.
Yeah. You're not allowed to use Homebrew. What?
Yeah, sorry, you don't have administrator access.
Pretty common, certainly in the larger organizations these days. So we like it. Thank you,
Mhm.
Amazon. On that note, let's move along to our next article for this week. This is an article which from a part of the AWS blog, which I don't think we've ever featured before. We've spoken a lot about cost optimization, but I didn't realize there was a specific AWS Cloud Financial Management blog. I don't think any of the posts that we've discussed have come from that subsection of the blog. But this one is all about new right-sizing recommendations for Amazon RDS, MySQL, and Postgres in AWS Compute Optimizer. So we've definitely spoken about Compute Optimizer before, but I guess these particular features were lacking, as they are claiming they are new. So Steve, I'll come to you first on this one. Is this going to be useful to you in your world, do you think?
I think so. I mean, I think really where a lot of customers really struggle is, they know that their typical their IT budgets just on databases alone. If you look at just what IT budgets are, is on average they're about 10 to 15% databases consist of. And as you're starting to move into cloud, is that the growing shift towards cloud based solutions like RDS and Aurora is continuing to grow. Now, with that is that the compute optimizer I think really helps customers because in a pay-as-you-go model, reducing upfront cost is extremely huge. Um, Databases are something that continue to fluctuate, and people get capacity management wrong a lot. So, with that being said, I think the compute optimizer helps customers identify where they can have additional cost-saving opportunities and also right-size their databases. It's either too big or too small. Or it's just simply just not performing well, which if that's the case, then it's probably the first answer, right? It's either too big or too small. I think this is great. It gives customers real insights as to what's happening, what storage options they have, and then kind of how they can get some additional insights around cost savings because most customers right now are going to be hitting that 25% IT needs to be more proficient and they need to be more optimized. So I think this is another great feature that Amazon is listening to their customers. They know that this is coming, meaning that they're looking to trim costs. So this is a good way for customers to get real insights into their current environment with spend.
John, we've never come across a customer with MySQL performance issues, have we, on RDS?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment, really.
No, you've never had it before. Never seen it, right?
Most days, in fact. Yeah.
Oh dear. Yeah, this tool is good. I like this. I'm going to slightly ape everyone's favorite cloud economist now because he's not wrong about this. This tool, brilliant. RDS not supporting savings plans, massive Achilles heel. Because RDS don't support savings plans, which means if you've done the work manually, and we do kind of for our customers, if you've done the work manually and you've got a reasonable reserved instance coverage, this becomes immediately useless because you're covered and you can't change. So you can optimize by going down a size. Yeah, cool, but it's not going to save us any money. So what? I'm not going to bother. So the fact that the reserved purchasing, the committed purchasing options for RDS is so completely inflexible as to be reserved instances only, and okay, go for the smallest ones, but you're going to cover what you've got. It makes this significantly less useful than it otherwise would have been.
So would you recommend more of a kind of a flexible savings plan for RDS?
That's what I want. That's exactly
something like how they have with EC2, where they have compute and EC2 savings plan.
I'd love to see that because compute savings plans, I mean, we go for compute rather than EC2 because EC2 savings plans, they're kind of like a flexible RI. So meh, it's harder to explain to a non-technical stakeholder. A compute savings plan is the easiest thing in the world to explain because in your spend, you spend money on servers and this and that and the other. So long as you spend this much per hour, you can have a 20% discount. Oh, cool, brilliant. Easiest thing in the world to explain, easiest thing in the world to sell. And if you do it properly with an organization, at the management account, if you split your workloads from legacy prod to, environment A and environment B, and your spend is actually the same, but it's just in two different places, you still get your discount. Brilliant. Lovely. RDS, you can't do that. And until you can do that with RDS, I'm just going to keep asking for it every time RDS cost optimization comes up because it's a necessity, frankly.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised that they don't have it yet. Why don't you have the savings plan option with it? Why only reserved instances? It seems like there would kind of be more giving customers more freedom, more flexibility to choose, right?
I wonder, is it because of the vendor licensed databases bringing in a layer of complexity? Because if you're buying Oracle on RDS, Microsoft SQL on RDS, you just pay a price which has the license baked in.
The license is per core, so yeah, maybe, but I don't see how that's not insurmountable because you have the same thing with compute because things like Red Hat licenses you pay per core.
Yeah, and those are still factored into the compute savings plans, right? The EC2 savings plans, yeah. So
because it's factored into the hourly spend, it's factored into the hourly cost. So it's I don't think it's that. It just feels like, I don't want to start getting nasty to the RDS team, but it just feels like it's not high enough on the roadmap.
So probably need to kind of give a good scream out to the RDS service team, right? Being like, hey, if you guys are listening to this podcast, can you please give us some savings plan with RDS? It would be very helpful.
We'll buy you 2 pizzas while you work it out.
And a free t-shirt.
Free t-shirts. Yeah.
T-shirt.
Probably not as well traveled as mine, but with free t-shirt nonetheless. So on that note, let's move along to our next article for this week. And this one is from the AWS News blog, and it's all about optimizing Amazon SQS, simple queue service, for speed and scale. And this one is from everyone's favorite cloud evangelist, Jeff Barr, talking about some new features on SQS. So, John, I'll come to you first on this one. Thoughts on Jeff's hair color, this reinvent, perhaps first?
I'm offended that I'm not your favorite cloud evangelist, Carl.
You've got some way to go to beat Jeff. Yeah, dye your hair pink. That would be a good start. But I think last year he didn't dye his hair any color. Although I don't know what color his hair naturally is, but it looked fairly natural at last year's reinvent. So he toned down the hair dye.
Shocking. Oh dear. So SQS, let's talk about that rather than hair care products.
Well, more hair color really, and the color is generally not very caring for your hair. It's generally bad for your hair and leads to the requirement to purchase hair care products. Anyway, let's talk about SQS.
I feel like you know more about this than you should.
But I don't really have that much hair for it to be.
Oh dear. So SQS, it says it in the article. SQS actually predates. Well, it doesn't say this, but it actually predates AWS as an offering. SQS predates that by 2 whole years. It was the first AWS service, first managed service for queuing, because MQ is awful and no one wants to manage it. So there you go. Brilliant. If ever there was a service that 2 decades later I didn't think that could do with being a bit faster and scaling a bit higher, SQS wouldn't really be in that list. And somehow they've done it. Like what? Okay, maybe it's just a factor of the size of the deployments that I'm working with. But it's what is it? 100 million messages per second at peak. Does that really need to get bigger? Is there really demand for that? And apparently there is. And they've gone ahead
On
and done
Prime
it.
Day.
Well, yeah,
Perhaps.
on one day a year, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what have they done? They've created a proprietary binary framing protocol, and I won't pretend to know what that is, but if ever there was a service that I didn't think needed improving in terms of speed and scalability, it was this, and they've gone and done it.
I couldn't agree more. This one kind of, when I saw it, it didn't really kind of, I always kind of say, what was the news that really sizzles? What's the new service that sizzles? This one for me really didn't, because, again, I think SQS just works great as it is. I didn't think it needed to have any type of additional performance or horsepower added behind it. So I was surprised to see this one. The thing that did kind of pop out with me was kind of this new topic around, they're going to put a new protocol into SQS. And I think about it. Okay, so customers are running SQS since 2006. You're going to put in a new protocol. I think the negative impact on that might be is, if you're an organization that is very highly ingrained with SQS in your environment, adapting to new protocols might require some changes in your existing applications. So I'm just wondering kind of like what that's going to look like for some customers. If I haven't seen it yet, whether it's going to be easy or hard, but I always kind of get a little bit weary when I hear something about, oh, we've got this new protocol that we're going to integrate into that. And you're like, yeah, but that's going to break most of our stuff. Well,
Yeah, I don't know if the protocol change is exposed to the user, because the way I've always used SQS has just been, well, Lambda's being told to run because there's some messages on the queue, or you just poll the queue, messages are there, they're in JSON, job done.
Yeah.
So I don't know how exposed that change is to the user beyond them kind of talking about it. I mean, the increase is, again, it's silly numbers. So it's data plane latency has been reduced by 11%, and at the P90 it's nearly 18%. And queues, they deliver 10% quicker, and they can hold 18% more messages. Okay, when at peak it's been shoving 750 trillion requests. What?
Yeah, well, there's
Yeah.
I think those are all wild numbers, but I think at some point you're probably either hitting a bottleneck somewhere, right? You're probably hitting a database, or probably someplace
Yeah,
that just
it's
doesn't
not the
have.
queue. It's not the
Yeah,
queue.
yeah. The queue is fine. It's basically where it's processing it to that's going to probably end up having to either probably hit a bottleneck, or there's going to be some sort of kind of like congestion that hits it somewhere that says, great, you can process, 15 trillion messages. It's like, yeah, but when you get to the database, prepare to wait.
Yeah. You might need to run a compute optimizer to get some recommendations for the right sizing of your database if you're going to throw that many messages at it. So
Why does it say my database is offline? What does that mean?
I mean, that's the only use case I can see for it needing to hold more messages, is because you're sending so much through the queue and you're having to throttle the queue so that you're not overwhelming downstream resources. But again, if you're backing the queue up with millions and millions and millions of messages, you've got a problem. So
Yeah.
Unless you're processing millions and millions and millions of messages every single second. like Amazon on Prime Day. I don't have the stats in front of me, but they do produce that insightful blog post every year about how AWS has scaled to meet the demands of Prime Day. So,
well, that's
I
in
think
2 weeks, so we'll get a new one soon.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think
is.
it's
Yeah.
isn't there more than one Prime Day?
I think there's Prime Day and then there's the Black Friday stuff, because
What
Prime
is
Day
it?
is
July 17th, I think it is.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's coming up pretty soon. Well, we'll see how efficient it is when I go to open up my Amazon app, see if I have any pictures of dogs that show up and go, I'm going to try to see if I can add this to my cart. Oh, wah, wah, wah. Look, I'm not saying this, it's not, but right. It's like, there are weaknesses in everyone's architecture. And at some point you may say, look, we could process this, but something's going to probably break downstream. Mm, maybe.
Absolutely.
I mean, the more traffic you throw at something and you're like, well, we used to always get wowed by saying like, well, how does HBO scale 80 million users or 80 million people watching Game of Thrones season 7? Okay, maybe season 6. How can they do that on a Sunday night at 8, at 9 p.m., right? Stuff like that, where you just have a huge, massive amount of user traffic hitting it. All pieces have to function harmoniously. Like, they have to all function like a perfect orchestra, right? Scale in, scale out has to occur. The architecture has to be elastic and scalable. And then you've got to be able to have certain elements in there that can withstand the fault tolerance. So if they do fail, the messages don't go just bye-bye.
So that everybody can see their favorite dragons and the other things that you see regularly on Game of Thrones, but we best not go there because it's a Safe for Work podcast. So on that note, let's move on to the next article for this week, which is changing gear slightly. And this one is from the aboutamazon.com site, all about how AWS can help reduce the carbon footprint of AI workloads by up to 99%. So obviously we all know that LLMs use a lot of compute power, and that's at odds with a lot of people's sustainability agendas. So this article, I guess, is trying to address how using AWS for your AI workloads can help you to reduce your carbon footprint. So, John, thoughts on this one?
Oh, I picked this because I saw someone else on LinkedIn, and I forget who now. Amazon staff had kind of pushed this out, part of their marketing or media relations team, and someone had sort of quoted back to them that one of their customers, it turns out they'd moved them to the cloud and their carbon footprint had gone up by 4 times. I'm like, okay, I didn't see any data for it and just kind of went, I'm not sure how much I buy that, but I'm sure it could happen, I guess. But the point with this is it's always been, from my perspective at any rate, ignore the whole green lobby for a minute, ignore the whole it's carbon neutral energy and all the rest of it. It's economies of scale. Start there, because I worked for an oil and gas company for a while for my sins, and they did mega data centers, as they called them. It was just, we'll take our little data centers and we'll co-locate them. We'll have lots of a smaller number of big ones. And then the cloud has just sort of taken that to the nth degree. It's taken it to the extreme where you've got a reasonably big number, but it's a massive company of enormous data centers. And what that allows you to do is you get much better density of your resources, because you can pack your servers in tighter. You're cooling them. Okay, your AC bill's going to go up a little bit because you've got 2 in space of 1, but whatever, it's not going to go up by 2x. You've got these economies of your staffing, because if you don't have quite so many buildings, you don't need so many security people, say, because you X number of entrances and exits and all the rest of it. And it just goes on and on and on. And the cloud more generally, when you start looking at VMs versus physical kit, more dense. You start looking at serverless versus VMs, more dense. Go on and go on and go on. And it's just, the density gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it helps with the emissions reduction, because rather than running one beefy server for an amount of power, you're running 1 million lambdas for that amount, and they could be doing a similar amount of compute, or even more potentially. So yeah, ignoring the whole green lobby for a minute, just the maths is there. And it says this in the first piece. It's hardware efficiency and cooling efficiency. It's, we're doing more in a smaller space. Cool, I'll buy that.
So you notice that the article basically says, and when you look at the article, it says optimizing workloads when moving to AWS. you can achieve up to your carbon footprint reduction up to 99% for optimized workloads. Yet the problem is that 85% of the global IT spend is still spent on-prem and on traditional IT data centers are still getting there slowly, but the cloud adoption has slowed, but not if you talk to Microsoft. You look at things like the purpose-built silicon and sustainable construction practices. I think these are all great. Again, the studies are out there is that less than 16% of organizations globally have adopted a sustainability posture. They say that they're doing it, however, the data doesn't show it. We know that AI is going to boom over the next 2 to 3 years, and I'm just going to get on my soapbox for a second. Amazon today just basically announced that to keep up with the AI surge, they're going to have to power the new data centers with nuclear power plants. So they just signed a deal today with Constellation Energy to be able to provide electrical supplied power from nuclear power plants on the East Coast to power these data centers. So you can be as conservative as possible when it comes to carbon footprint, offsetting natural gas, renewables, energy, and all those things like that. Again, energy's kind of always been a thing when you start talking about clean energy and nuclear, those tend to kind of get a very, very different opinion from different people. But again, is that in order to continue to keep fueling the massive rate of AI with all of these supercomputers, is that you're going to need power from a power plant at some point. So
We've spoken about nuclear on the pod before, back when AWS announced that they were
Mhm.
funding a previously mothballed power station. And we're fairly, I mean, personally, I'm fairly bullish about nuclear. It's the,
Mhm.
what are you going to do with the waste? Okay, how much? I
Yeah.
think in all of history, from all of the nuclear power stations ever, the amount of waste is something like 4 football pitches, 6 football pitches. It's
Yeah.
minuscule amounts.
Yeah.
And the again, this is the density thing. The energy density of a piece of uranium or a piece of plutonium, it's like 10 grams. It's 250,000 tons of coal, or
Mhm.
something just ridiculous. So, yeah, nuclear power, cool. Moving on.
Yeah.
It's not coal. It's not coal. That's the main
Yeah,
thing.
No,
look, I mean, I think if you say, look, in order for us to be carbon neutral and have renewables and all the sustainability, I think, and all those things that really kind of appeal to kind of the Greenpeace movement, everything, cool, I'm all for that. But again, nuclear is a very clean form of energy. It's very safe, and you don't get much more cleaner and more renewable than nuclear energy. Maybe this is kind of a play for nuclear to kind of come back again. I don't know. Most people tend to think that it's still not as popular, but again, your alternative is okay, fine, we'll just keep burning coal power plants. It's just like, okay, well, either we can decommission those and build nuclear reactors. You see what Microsoft is doing right out there with Wyoming with the new Azure data centers that they're building with the new Stargate data center with OpenAI. They're basically running Bill Gates's own TeraWulf nuclear power plant out there in the middle of nowhere. It's like it has to be powered somehow by something that can just produce a massive amount of energy. It doesn't matter how great the products are in the data center, you need power.
need to build a Dyson sphere around the sun.
Yeah.
Really nerdy joke that.
Well, again, it's well, again, we're not even what are we, a type 4 on the Kardashev scale, or are we type 1?
No, we're
We're
not
not even
even
type
type
1.
1. Type
We're
1
not even
is
type 1
all of the energy
in your
that hits
universe,
the
right?
planet that you can take. Type 2 is all of it from a sun.
Okay. Yep. Now we're into super nerdy territory, right? Now we're talking about nuclear physics. Okay. Perfect. Well, that
Well,
just kind of,
yeah, on that note, I am conscious of time, but we can
yeah.
stick with the nerdy subjects if you like, because we have got another article this week, which is all about 4 ways AWS is engineering infrastructure to power generative AI. So potentially we can continue with the nerdy
Yeah.
physics discussion. But yeah, what are the 4 ways that AWS are doing this?
Oh, what have we got? We have got
Well, we've got delivering
large
low
scale.
latency.
Yeah.
Yeah, low latency, large scale networking, which is a bit of a change of
Well, I
track.
mean, it kind of came up in the various keynotes and things that we saw. We're at this inflection point for compute density, and one of those things is large scale low latency networking, because you can't have really dense systems if you're still plugging disks into chips. You can't do that. So you have to have this capacity to have your compute modules logically separate, physically separate from your storage modules. And you've been able to do this in racks for a while, where you just have this massive array of SSDs underneath of your compute units. But again, you have to get the latency really low so that the computer doesn't care that it's not actually attached to it. So, again, it's a density thing. What's the next one? Energy efficiency of data centers.
Is energy efficiency. So we're back on the same topic that we just covered in the previous article.
Yeah, I think we've beaten that one to death. The security from the ground up. What do they mean by that? Security's got to be a day one job, hasn't it? You can't, for anything AI or otherwise, you've got to be baking it into how you're doing things, AI or otherwise.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of concerns, certainly within our organization, within our customer base, and within the market at large, of who owns the data, where is the data going, is the data being used to train the models? Do we have to opt in for the data to be used to train the models? Do we have to opt out? There's a lot of that kind of FUD in the market. And
that's very unclear from a number of third-party providers as well, because in some cases you're on by default unless you turn it off, and in other cases you're off by default unless you turn it on. And in some cases, I forget who, in order to opt out of your data being used for data training, you have to email support, which I thought was just ridiculous.
I think that was Slack, wasn't it? I think
it might have been,
do that with Slack. So, yeah. But it's certainly a big topic right now. Is this affecting you guys, Steve? Are you seeing this?
You're talking about the article when it's talking about the AWS infrastructure. There are 4 ways that they're engineering infrastructure for Gen AI.
Yeah, we're just talking about the security piece, but we kind of went off on a bit of a tangent about data security and AI.
I mean, look, don't get me started on security, right? So here's what happened. In the last week alone, I got a letter from my internet provider. Okay, you're the internet provider, and you sent me a letter, and it says, after further research, you have been you've been determined to have been subject to a data cyber attack that we had in our systems in April of this past year. Your information, such as your name, date of birth, address, social security number, may have been compromised. We're going to give you 3 months of credit monitoring. I'm like, oh, okay. You're the internet provider, right? You should have the most sophisticated security in the world. In the same week, 3 days later, I get an email from Ticketmaster. Ticketmaster says, hey, we just noticed that you are part of a data breach. And I'm like, gosh, what's going on? So of course, it's just like when you mention things like, we've got to figure out how we're going to basically kind of enable cybersecurity to leverage things like generative AI to get better with more sophisticated forensics and trending analysis around kind of like these type of cyber attacks that are happening. We've got to figure out how we're going to pair the two together. That's going to be a good combination of next generation AI with cybersecurity, because it's just like, look, well, we just didn't patch a firewall. There was an update somewhere. It's like, that's just not going to fly anymore. It just isn't. I mean, at some point, people are going to say, look, me as a consumer, my data is everywhere. I've been hacked. My data leaked everywhere. Everything about me is everywhere. Somebody's got to come up with something that's going to be bleeding edge and then cutting edge, and then it's got to be widely adopted. It's got to fundamentally change how security is looked at and how it's implemented across organizations. This wasn't like Etsy that my email account got hacked. I mean, it's like Ticketmaster. I'm like, I'm not going to be able to buy those Taylor Swift VIP tickets. Okay, fine. Whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, I think, the data breach is one side of it. The fact that we're just willfully giving it over because, the terms and conditions say so, and we haven't opted out is also a concern. It's not even a breach. It's just, I gave it to you and I didn't realize I was giving it to you.
Right. So I think that's kind of where it gets me riled up when I hear about security when I hear people say, well, we've got strong data protection measures and stuff like that, and then things happen, and then you're like, well, what happened to this? Like, well, see, what happened was, and then whatever the excuse is, but I think when you look at things like healthcare, finance, I think again, it's like, it's going to get very scary. You're going to have to get very sophisticated, because when you start getting people who have financial accounts that get hacked, or healthcare where you got things such as patient data gets out there, I mean, it's really bad news. It's bad press for any entity. And especially if they're running in a cloud provider, it's not good.
Absolutely. And of course, on the one side, you have the policy. This is what we say we're doing with your data. On the other side, you have the implementation. This is what we're actually doing with your data. And of course, the only thing we can check as consumers is the policy. And we have to rely on the specific vendors to make sure that they are implementing the policy effectively, which when we hear about the breaches, clearly they are not. Anyway, conscious of time, that's not quite what this article was about, but it was a useful discussion about security and the impact of AI on security as well. So we have reached the end of our time for season 3, episode 25 of Logicast. So it remains for me to thank our guest, Steve Woodard, for your insights. Thank you very much for joining us, and wishing you the best of luck with your own podcasts as well. And thanks, as always, to my colleague John for your insights and for choosing the same T-shirt as me this morning, which if you're listening, you won't be able to see, but don't forget, we are available to download wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to see John and I wearing the same T-shirt, we also stream the podcast on YouTube. So check it out there. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next time with another episode of Logicast for you. See you again next time.